My dear sister, forgive me. I have too long neglected my brotherly duty in allaying your concern for my welfare, though I dare say this letter may serve the opposite purpose. You may remember, Margaret, that ill-fated voyage I undertook to the pole that ended in near mutiny, and the gentleman I rescued from the ice, only to watch him perish in my cabin after unburdening his story, one M. Victor Frankenstein. I should have ended him in that moment, as Frankenstein implored me to do, but alas, I did not, and now my sympathy, nay, my cowardice, has unleashed this demon upon our world with a more horrifying intent, as Frankenstein feared would happen. For he is alive, Margaret. Alive in Paris.
The first ever spooky themed, slightly darker cinematic showcase that's ever been done on this channel. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about this slightly darker take on a cinematic showcase. Now, I also posted some behind the scenes content and also a concept trailer for Abomination on my Patreon page that was just launched last week, and we're one patron away from completing the very first goal within a week of launching Patreon, so that is beyond amazing. If that's something that you are interested in, I will leave the links down below. And with that, onward towards the review. Gotta make sure I gear up properly before I talk about some games today. So am I right? Or am I right? Now, in Abomination, you know what it's about pretty much. From the beginning of the cinematic showcase, we know that it is set in the 1800s, in 1819 specifically, if you want the exact year. Now, this is set 20 years after the events of Victor Frankenstein, who met his doom after he pursued the creature that he created. So his Abomination is now running around Paris, and he's invited several scientists, one of them being you of course, who has to come help out in the dark arts of scrapping together human and animal remains to continue building a monster. Your goal is to bring a creation to life or score the most victory points by scrapping together the most parts by the end of 12 rounds. Now, the artwork isn't my personal cup of tea, mostly because it's a bit gory. You have eyes gouged out of bodies, and you have human flesh kind of skinned out, and it's very thematic in that sense. So the artwork clearly fits the theme that the game emanates. So if you like fleshy, gory, gruesome-y type artwork, then for sure you'll probably like the artwork done in this game. Components next, it's a little bit of a letdown, especially for a game like this, because Abomination has so many components, and I feel like this game in particular would fare very well with high-end components. Hear me out for a quick second. You are playing as a scientist. Imagine how much more fun it would be if all of these components here were actual like little mini organs instead of just colored cubes. Imagine if all of the body parts that you have here to assemble is kind of like a adult version of Operation. So you have these modular plastic or resin pieces that you're putting together on like a mini body table or something. For all the places around Paris that you're visiting, imagine putting your meeple in like a 3D cemetery or like a 3D academy or morgue or hospital. It's not necessary, but it would look so cool, and I feel like the game would really benefit from it. It wouldn't hurt it, but it would really benefit from it. Especially for a highly thematic, story-driven game like this, having a ton of these components so lackluster, I feel like upgrading the components overall would look so cool, and it would connect super well with the overall story anyway. If you just look at it, it may not be the most enticing game to play, but with those components, it would automatically sell people in and also be that much more fun for older players. But that's just me. And to add on a little bit more to that, the player boards are paper thin. It would be really cool if these were like double layered player boards and if they had individual slots for all the resources, or at least have different gates between each tier so you can like kind of dump resources from gate to gate. How cool would it be to have these Leyden jars here, if they're charged, have them actually light up? You have like a little mini switch. Instead of just saying pull the switch as a mechanism, you actually are pulling a switch for the LEDs like light up the Leyden jars, or to light up the body parts that you have here on the table. You know what, let's just go all out. Forget the double layer player boards. How about just have a giant mini table, a mini operation table per player? This game's price would skyrocket, but it would be so cool and fun. But the bottom line here, I think this game really suffers in lackluster components, and it would benefit a lot by upgrading certain pieces. In particular, the resources for sure. I think those would benefit a lot by being upgraded instead of just being individual colored cubes. Now there are a couple other things I want to mention here. The blue resource cubes don't actually match up with the resource cubes shown in the rulebook, which are actually purple. That was a little bit confusing at first because of course you're going to scavenge around for those particular tokens when you're starting off the game. I don't fully understand the inclusion of this extra circle on top of the dials. One, because they couldn't really fit when I tried to insert them in, and two, I don't really see the purpose that they serve because I just put them without the circle and they fit fine. For the event deck, you're supposed to shuffle a bunch of cards together and then put this cover right on top so people don't see what the next card is. But honestly, that serves a little bit more of a hassle because you have to take it off every single time. For me, I think it's a little bit of hassle. I think it would have been way better if they just separated the round cards, because you have events, 1 through 6, and then you have events 7 through 12. Why not just make them separate cards so you don't have to keep flipping them each time? Just the act of putting this cover card on top of the card every single time you are switching rounds, wasn't a big fan of that. And lastly, my biggest gripe with the components especially is that there is zero organization. So here is the storage box, right? So there is no organization whatsoever. There's no storage tray. There aren't any inserts whatsoever. You just dump a bunch of components into the box. I'll be honest, I usually don't care about the whole setup of a game, but the fact that everything is just so disorganized and just lumped into a box like that makes it so much more difficult. It's a little bit off-putting to play in because now you kind of dread the setup. And especially when filming, I had to break it down and set it up so many more times. And it would have saved a ton of time if there was some sort of organization, at least a couple inserts for like the resources and for the 12 different decks that they have here. Okay, moving on to the rulebook. The rulebook, I think overall was pretty well written. It was very straightforward. Actually, the game was way more streamlined and straightforward than I thought it would be to play, because with just the components overall, you would think that there's quite a steep learning curve, but there isn't. It's actually a pretty straightforward game. There's actually the section in the rulebook called the game tips. I love that section. I think it would have been more fitting if that section was called resource action summary. It would have been so much better, because with worker placement games, you're always kind of thinking about, okay, well, how do I gain this specific resource and how do I get to this resource? So there are certain ladders and certain routes that you have to take in order for you to gain a resource that you're looking for. They summarize it all in one little subsection, which I thought was very helpful, and I love that part. To give you a specific example, let's say I needed to build a couple of monster parts. Well, first I need to build my reputation. And then you're wondering, well, how do I increase reputation? Boom, here are 5 different ways that you can do so. So I love that. It made everything so much easier to organize your turns around. And finally, let's discuss the most important part about any board game review, and that is, of course, the gameplay. Now here's how your turn works. Every turn you have something called an event phase, where you pick up the first card of the deck, and that card is going to highlight a certain location for that turn because it's going to give you bonus rewards. The person that drew it, though, is the only person that knows if that event card has an extra trigger effect. Now there are specific scenarios and instances that I won't spoil here, but let's say you're visiting the hospital. Sometimes you'll have an event that's triggered there, and then from the rulebook you'll read a specific scenario that happens to that particular player that landed on that space. So just because there's a bonus there, it doesn't mean you should always go for it. And then you go on to the city phase. So for the city phase, you're going to take your meeple, your scientist, and place it around different parts of Paris. When you do so, you're going to gain different resources, and you'll also have the option of bumping other players. When you bump a player, you're going to take their meeple and put them in the space here called bribe and bump. Now when you do so, you do have to give another player money, and you have the option of bumping yourself as well. After that, you're going to take all the resources that you have gathered, and then you're going to start building monster parts here on your player board. From there, your materials are going to move down the track, and if they get to certain instances, like for example, after tier 2, you're going to discard blood, and then after tier 4, you're going to discard all the resources. So you have to play this balancing effect as resources are moving every single time, and you also can go to like the market, for instance, in order to preserve your resources by using ice, by keeping them on ice. Now this is all happening during the lab phase, and you'll also have a mechanism called throw the switch. When you throw the switch, it's going to make certain body parts come alive. So you roll a dice to see if you roll this alive marker, but if you roll a broken heart, that's going to hurt your reputation, so your reputation in turn goes down. The lightning symbol is going to downgrade your monster part, and then after that, your resources are going to move, and then everything gets reset. Now I also want to mention that these dials are something that you build up or decrease depending on all your actions. You'll need different attributes to perform different things, And you do have the option of choosing good or bad here, or good versus evil here. And if you perform evil actions, like for example, murder, you'll gain a ton of resources, but in turn, your reputation goes down a lot. Okay, so I love how story-driven and interactive Abomination is. I think overall, Abomination is a really fun worker placement game. Even putting artwork aside, I still had a ton of fun even with these minimal components. So can you imagine if all these components were upgraded? It'd be that much more fun. I like how every turn you have the chance to interact with other players by bumping them off certain spaces. Now that makes gameplay very dynamic and very interesting because you can't just have one set cookie cutter strategy, because now your turns are changing every single turn depending on what other players do to affect your meeples, to affect your worker placements, to affect your overall strategy. I think that bumper mechanic is pretty cool. It kind of sets the game apart because I haven't really seen another game where you are pushing workers off of certain places and then having to pay the other person. So with this balance of resource and location management, I think it adds a unique perspective and a unique change to overall worker placement strategy, which I think is really cool. I also like how every map is coordinated with a set of cards and a set of unique actions and resources that you can gain from it. So interacting with each place really feels like you are visiting, the hospital or the public square or the cemetery. And this is awesome because it increases replayability. The way resources are also constantly moving to on your player board puts some stress on you, some good stress, and so to say, when you're trying to balance out which one to discard, which one to save on ice, which one to use on body parts. So all that flexibility in decision making and kind of thinking about how are you going to adjust every resource every turn, I think makes it for some really fun and interesting resource management. So I like that flexibility. But with that said, even though you can be flexible in the way that you choose the quote good path and the bad path, I think it's pretty clear and pretty obvious which path you can choose. Again, I don't want to say any kind of spoiler or like strategy yet since this is strictly a review video, but I do think with the option of good versus bad, the game definitely leans towards one. Which one? That's for you to discover on your own. So overall, Abomination is a fun worker placement game despite the lackluster components and despite the major painful organization. It's fun. So can you imagine if they had a reprint of this, but with better storage options and more organization and better components overall? Then it's going to definitely upgrade the quality of this game, and it's just gonna be amazing. I also think it's fun because there's no set cookie cutter strategy. There's a ton of options and flexibility on your turn, from how you can approach the way you manage your resources, from all the locations that you're interacting with on the map. The bumper mechanic is definitely one way that you're interacting with other players, along with different events being triggered at different locations depending on the event card that you chose. So those are my thoughts and the overall cinematic showcase on Abomination. I hope you liked this video. Hope you found it helpful in deciding whether or not you choose to play or buy this game. But most importantly, what do you think about this game? Have you played Abomination before? Is this a game that you're going to pick up especially for October? Have you been on the fence about it? Let me know down in the comments below, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing if you aren't already, and I will see you all in the next video.